Welcome to another year of Sovereign Radio. I'm your host, Chango and Jane. I'm here with Orkun of Citrea.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So Citrea is a Bitcoin L2 and Orkun believes in hyper-Bitcoinization. Why don't we talk about that?
Yes, sure. So hyper-Bitcoinization is an idea that put around 10 years ago by an old Bitcoiner called Daniel Kravis. And the idea is in the future world, we will see Bitcoin is adopted as the unit of account and we don't need any other inferior monies like Turkish lira or US dollar. Instead, everyone will use Bitcoin for their all daily stuff.
And Bitcoin being the global settlement layer?
Yes, Bitcoin being the global settlement layer, BTC being the unit of account asset, BTC being used in regular economy just like we use fiat currencies today.
So how did reading that paper then lead you to build a Bitcoin L2?
Yeah, that paper is actually a very, very short article, but it's created, I think, even before that, people were thinking Bitcoin will be adopted for all the states and all the governments around the world. They will back their money with BTC. But the idea is there's a growth that needs to be happen while reaching to that point. Right now, I think we are in still store of value stage of Bitcoin. We haven't reached to medium of exchange or unit of account. And in order to make that happen, we need scaling. That's the Bitcoin's current challenge. Bitcoin L1 is the most decentralized and secure base layer. Most people can argue it, but I think it's not something to argue given the number of nodes and the mining cache power and stuff. But in order to everyone should use BTC, and everyone should use BTC whatever they want. They should be lending, borrowing stable coins, or they should be lending, borrowing Bitcoin-backed assets. But in order to make it happen, we need layers on Bitcoin. This is not only rollups like we built, but it can be channels, it can be private applications, rollups, sidechains, whatever. What we want to see is layers on top of Bitcoin that can make access to Bitcoin very easy, cheap, and can provide more options to users instead of just doing large payments on the base layer.
Citrea is a ZK rollup on top of Bitcoin.
Yes.
And you're using BitVM for settlement.
Yes.
Can you talk about the technical architecture?
Yeah. So on the L2 level, it is very similar to Ethereum ZK rollups today. It's running we are building a ZK EVM, so you can compare it with, let's say, Scroll. On the L2 level, it is very similar. There's a sequencer producing blocks, there's a prover producing proofs. But instead of settling on the base layer every single block, what we do is we simply inscribe that proofs to Bitcoin, just like inscriptions, just like taproot wizards, opcat images. We just inscribe that proofs to the base layer. And after some time, we aggregate these proofs together. And at the end, we have a single succinct proof representing the whole Citrea blockchain. And then that proof is optimistically verified on Bitcoin using BitVM. BitVM is a bit complex mechanism that enables arbitrary computation on Bitcoin in an optimistic way. So how BitVM works is there's a simple ZK verifier script in Bitcoin, but it is way larger than the block size, so you cannot execute on-chain directly. And BitVM simply divides that ZKP verifier into small chunks. And if there's something wrong, you can just execute the incorrect chunk. So Bitcoin can verify through incomplete computation whether it is correct or not. Using that mechanism, we enable trust minimized two-way peg mechanism between Citrea and Bitcoin. But just inscription is also enough to get Bitcoin security for double spending, reorg resistance, censorship resistance, and all the other properties that Bitcoin provides to us.
Makes sense. Are you concerned about the potentially ephemeral nature of inscriptions and posting proofs to sats?
So it's a bit hacky way to put data on Bitcoin. It was already possible since the Bitcoin's genesis with OP return up to 80 bytes, but inscriptions, people realize that you can put up to 4 megabytes data each block. But the data through output is still way, way lower than Celestia or Ethereum with blobs or Avail, whatever. But that's the only way to get Bitcoin security. If you are using other DA layer, then you are trusting that DA layer to not withhold the data, their social consensus. But most Bitcoin users they are just part of the Bitcoin social consensus. They are not part of other blockchains usually, and they are not part of their social consensus. So we start in that way. It is not extremely scalable, like million TPS or whatever, but it's the only way to get full Bitcoin security. And in our roadmap, we have models like Volition, which we enable also off-chain data, and users can choose where to send their data. So we simply opt in another DA option, which is our peer-to-peer network, and people can use it if they don't think Bitcoin security needed for that application. But if they think this should have Bitcoin security, they will simply choose to send their data to Bitcoin. And this is how we are going to scale in the next coming years.
Okay. So, yeah, I don't fully understand the technical differences between inscriptions and stamps, but my understanding of it is that stamps is actually immutable on chain forever, but then inscriptions, for in terms of miners, they can and cannot decide to propagate the data in the inscriptions.
Yeah, so for inscriptions, you put the data into like the witness part. So some miners, like Ocean Mining Pool, chooses to like filter that. So if you have a transaction which costs a lot in terms of data, but not in terms of script, they simply don't put into the block. But they are way lower on hash rate on like compared to the other pools in Bitcoin. The other thing is the stamps is they put the data in Bitcoin script directly rather than putting into the witness part. But it costs 4 times more than inscriptions. But yeah, it is extremely hard to understand whether it's a stamp or regular Bitcoin transaction. So some people use it to like just spam the network and like make maxis angry. But I think inscriptions are way safer to use, and if someone don't want to store their like inscriptions on their computer, they can simply prune it. So that's also another advantage of using inscriptions.
Yeah. So that leads to my question, which is if you have a ZK rollup that's running on Bitcoin, you're probably going to have some high value transactions that
Yes.
you want to be immutable on the chain. So if you're submitting proofs to an inscription on Bitcoin, how does that inherit the security of Bitcoin?
Yeah, so on the L2 level, these transactions are processed in blocks, and eventually prover creates a proof, and that proof says I started from this L2 block and ended in this L2 block, and I run all the EVM execution, and that's correct. This is the proof part. And together with it, there's a state diff created, which is simply the difference between the latest blockchain data and the initial blockchain data during the proof generation. And these two things go into the Bitcoin as an inscription. So if you are just running a full node, you simply sync from sequencer. But you also check Bitcoin regularly and get that proofs and verify locally so that you can make sure sequencer is getting confirmations correctly and equal to everyone. So some other node cannot just fork away with sequencer data because Bitcoin is now your source of truth. If the data is not on Bitcoin, if the proof is not on Bitcoin, then this means that fork of the chain is invalid. So you get the double spending protection of Bitcoin. If it's already ordered in Bitcoin, then it's final. That's how you get Bitcoin security for these L2 transactions.
Gotcha. All right. And so you have given a talk at the Modular Summit.
Yes.
And I'm curious to know what you're covering in that talk. What are you about to reveal to the world with respect to hyper-Bitcoinization?
Yeah, my talk full title is like hyper-Bitcoinization through modularity. My idea is in order to like achieve the hyper-Bitcoinization, we should have layers. And I don't think we should only have one layer like Lightning or Citrea. We should have multiple layers. And they can be all connected through these channels like Lightning, or they can be connected through chain abstraction. But we cannot scale solely on the L1. It's too hard, especially if you're on Bitcoin, then you need to go through this social consensus process, which takes 4 or 5 years per each BIP. And it's not possible to scale L1 without increasing blocks to like gigabytes of data, which is we definitely don't want. But if we can build opt-in L2s like rollups, like validiums, like channels, then we can scale Bitcoin for everyone without bothering L1 too much. ZK proofs are a very great example for that. You do all the stuff on L2, but L1 simply has this 200 bytes of data, the proof. to protect the validity of the L2 transaction and nothing else. So I think that's an ideal way of scaling. And on Citrea, you can simply build L3s using alternative DA layers as well. So you get extremely cheap transactions with trust minimized BTC as your native asset. I think there should be great applications to be built, like order books using Bitcoin, prediction markets settling with Bitcoin. There are a lot of applications to build. We just trying to provide the best infrastructure so that you can build applications with the same level of security of Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And in the future, we want to see more and more layers on Citrea, on Bitcoin, on Lightning, whatever, but they should be all connected and work in an interoperable way to scale Bitcoin for all use cases and everyone.
Yes, right. That makes sense. So most of the higher volume that requires higher throughput transactions are supposed to be run on your ZK EVM, and then possibly settle on something like Celestia, like a separate DA layer or something, and then transactions ultimately settle in Bitcoin.
Yes, exactly. Like if you want to have extremely high through output, you don't have to have this DA limit of Bitcoin. So in order to kind of bypass it, you can build an L3 where you can send the data to Celestia and settle on Citrea, and Citrea eventually settles on Bitcoin. So you get Bitcoin security with very cheap fees, so you can build extremely high throughput chains to build all this stuff like prediction markets and order books.
Very interesting. Are there any applications currently building on Citrea?
Yes, so we recently launched our public DevNet. That's kind of ZK EVM running on Bitcoin, but the bridge mechanism in between is still work in progress. But that's kind of developer preview, so that developer can see that this is fully EVM compatible, and they can simply copy paste all the Solidity applications and run here. There is currently DEX live to people to test the swaps, so you can mint tokens, you can swap tokens, and there are a couple teams installed building core primitives like alerties, like lending borrowing, like DEX. But on production, there's only one today running on DevNet so that people can experiment. But we always look for founders, and in Modular Summit there are a lot of founders. Especially, I think we already have enough infra. Everyone is talking about this, but we have enough infra now. We should focus on applications, and I'm already seeing some people starting to create more creative use cases with BTC and Bitcoin security. So if there's anyone who wants to build something cool on Bitcoin but don't want to deal with Bitcoin script, or don't want to get the limitations of Bitcoin script, they can simply come and build Citrea with the same level of security.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, I'm excited to have Citrea exist, and if you are too, be sure to tune in to Orkun's talk at the Modular Summit, and you could follow along. Do comment below in the comment section to see if you agree with the worldview of hyper-Bitcoinization or not. Love to hear from you. Thank you, Orkun.
Thank you for having me.